All right, people, check this out. So I've been pretty busy lately trying to be a good dad and trying to spend as much time as possible with my daughter. At the same time, I've been coming into the shop and trying to do a little bit of experiment. And over the course of last few weeks, I made this little stool out of broken skateboards and epoxy. And I made something like this before, and I made a YouTube video about it in the past. But this time I wanted to try out the TOTALBOAT Fathom or Phantom. I don't know which one it is, but you could pour up to 3 inches deep, and it's perfect for river tables, but I'm not gonna make river tables. So I decided to make this, and it's crystal clear. There's 0 bubbles in this stool. So I forgot to make a YouTube video for this, and I only made an Instagram reel. So for this video, I'm going to make this stool, but a lot better, and I'll explain every step of the way. So if you have 13 skateboards, you could probably make it, okay? Okay, so I went ahead and turned those broken skateboards into these blocks, and these are going to be for the legs, and this is going to be for the seat. Now, since most of you already know how I prep these skateboards and it takes a while and I didn't want to spend any more time explaining than I need to, for those of you who've never seen this video before or seen my channel, let me just explain it real quick on how I turn those broken skateboards into these blocks. First, I take off the grip tape using my D-Gripper 5000. It's just a toaster oven, slow rotating motor underneath, and it does the job. Now, some of these broken skateboards have really shitty grip tape jobs, so it takes a while for me to take off these grip tapes, but you just gotta do it. Next, I could chop up these skateboards into different sections using my miter saw. And then I could do the worst part of prepping these skateboards, which is sanding. Now, instead of using the carving disc, I decided to use the flap disc on the angle grinder, and it actually works a lot better. So I'm gonna probably start doing that from now on. Now, after I'm done sanding, I do something called the tax cut, which is saving the little edge on the side of the skateboards so that I could give that to the skate shop owner, and he really likes it because that's the history of these skateboards and what it went through, and he makes something out of those, so it's perfect trade-off. And then after that, I could resaw them on the bandsaw, and 2 edges are going to be used for the legs, and then the middle section will be used for the seat. Now, some of these skateboards were a little too long for the mold, so I had to cross-cut them and trim them down, and I actually get nice, clean, consistent broken edges on the mold, so it'll come out more consistent. Next, I use 2-to-1 high-performance epoxy by TOTALBOAT to laminate these skateboards into blocks. And when I have it in these blocks, it's so much easier for me to do the pour, and I don't have to worry about, some of the skateboards floating up. And that's how I prep these broken skateboards and turn it into these blocks. Now, in this video, I want to focus more about the epoxy pour and other things instead of talking about how I recycle skateboards. So pretty much, I'm ready to go. Okay, so I'm running into a little bit of an issue, and the issue being my epoxy was a little old. So the color of the epoxy is a little yellow. It's not too bad, but I want it more clear than this. So from what I remember, I could use blue ink and mix up a little bit to cancel out that yellow to make it a little more clear, maybe even more blue, which I don't mind. So let's try that, because I never tried this before. I could mess up this whole thing, or it'll be amazing. Okay, so the epoxy turned out a little more greenish blue than I expected. It's almost like Mountain Dew Baja Blast. And I don't really like that color. So what I'm actually going to do, add more drops of the blue dye, and luckily it's see-through, so I'm not covering any of these broken edges. But yeah, I was hoping to have it more clear. So if you're trying to do this, don't use old epoxy. Woo! I'm just gonna go ham and go as blue as possible without being too dark. Ooh. That looks nice. This looks like every other river table color. Yeah, whatever. This is fine. Okay, so I'm ready to do the pour, and only thing that's really important is having a clean mold as well as securing the block of wood that's gonna go inside the mold nice and firmly, because with the epoxy, this block could just easily just float up and you're just wasting a whole bunch of epoxy. So make sure to secure it down so none of the blocks are floating up and you're wasting epoxy. So all I have to do now is pour it, and I just have to pour it really slowly so there's no air gaps that get stuck inside the broken edges, and just literally leave it there for 5 days. Don't touch it. Don't even try to pop the bubbles. Don't do anything, okay? I know it's hard not to do anything, but that's what you gotta do on this. Not bad. Okay, so it's been about 5 to 7 days. I can't really remember, but now it's hardened. There's few things that went wrong with this. I mean, it's not terrible, but there's certain things that I think you guys should know, so maybe you could use it later in your project. So let me take it off and I'll explain everything, and I'll show you close-up shots of what's going on. Okay. I like this color too. It actually looks almost like glass. This one's even better. Okay, so I have it off the mold, and let me just explain a few things so it'll be very helpful for you in the future if you plan on using these epoxy. So starting off with the legs, there's few bubbles here on the top, and that's because this little solid block that I use to hold the blocks down, there's nowhere for these airs to escape. So what I should have done is add a little bit of shims on the bottom. So there's a little bit of gap here, clamp it, and that's gonna allow all these bubbles to pop instead of getting trapped underneath this. This one has 0 bubbles inside. It's just all on the surface here. And I'm going to clean it up on the bandsaw so I don't even have to worry about sanding this off. So I give this glue up 9 out of 10. One mistake, and that's perfectly okay, because we could always get rid of it anyways. Now, the second one is this one. This is going to be for the seat, and just like before, there's a little bit of air pockets where the solid block was to hold the skateboard blank down. Now, secondly, there's a little bit of exothermic reaction happening right around here, and that's because I tried to pop the bubbles by using the heat gun, and I went at it a little too long. Third thing is the inside. Now, if you look at it, there's bubbles on one side and there's no bubbles on the other side. And this could be explained very easily. So when I was gluing up these skateboards by itself without doing the pour, I was in a rush on the last half of the glue up because the epoxy started getting a little harder, and I was running out of time, so I kind of rushed it. But the first half, I made sure to dip the skateboard edges so that I could seal every single part of the broken edges of these skateboards with epoxy before I started doing the big pour. And that's the reason why there's a little bit of micro bubbles inside the first half of this glue up, I guess. Or not glue up. Lamination. Not even lamination. Deep pour. I don't even know what to call it. Now the last thing is wasting a lot of epoxy here. So I'm only getting maybe 11.5 inch diameter circle out of this pour, but all this on the side is just a waste. And I should have just cut the skateboards into size and got a proper size mold so I don't waste a whole bunch of epoxy. That's what's going on. So if you want to use TOTALBOAT thick set epoxy, make sure to use the link down below and avoid all these simple mistakes that you could get rid of by doing it properly. Okay. Okay, so I went ahead and broke down those two different blocks into more usable pieces. So I got 4 legs here and the stool seat. This is about 11.5 inches in diameter. Now, when I was processing it on the bandsaw, this is all the waste that came off of it, and especially the stool seat. There's a ton of waste, and this is a lot of money. So if you're doing this, make sure to have the right size mold so you're not wasting any epoxy and wasting money. What I have to do is I have to turn these wooden pieces into a circular tapered legs. Now, I could do this on the lathe, and I got a brand new lathe that's more than capable of doing this, but I want to have all consistent taper with the same exact size. And in order for me to do that, I gotta get a little more practice on the lathe before I start doing stuff. Since I already have the table saw lathe jig, I'm just gonna use that. And then for the tenons, I'll use the lathe to get a finer fit so nothing's loose and everything fits perfectly tight. Got it? Okay, so I used the table saw lathe jig and turned it round. And now I could do the tapers. And if you know anything about this jig, there's a video on it as well, but pretty much there's 2 different points. You spin it with the drill, and I have, dust collection and a cover. But essentially, you could adjust the thickness of the diameter of these by raising this table saw blade. And if you want to do the taper, you just have to raise 1 point, and however much you're going to raise, which is 1/2 inch for me, that's how much you have to raise the table saw blade. And that's it. So I'm gonna do that. So I have 2 blocks of 1/2 inch, put it over here, and now it's 1/2 inch raised. And then Okay, so I finished turning the legs on the table saw, and as you can see, they're the exact same size with the exact same tapers, super straight. And then I took it over to the lathe and cut the tenons out, perfect fit. And I also sanded it on the lathe up to about 400. So legs are almost finished. I just have to buff out the epoxy later on, and I'll do that once the seat is shaped. Now, speaking of the seat, we have a nice little circle here, and I'm gonna take it over to the lathe and I'm gonna carve out a little seat, and then we have to sand it. Aye. Okay, so I finished turning the stool seat and I carved out a little bit in the middle, and it's actually pretty comfortable when I was testing it out. Now, it was a little difficult to turn this because the epoxy is a lot heavier than the wood, so I couldn't go faster than 500 RPM. Oh, another thing, I put a little bit of epoxy in the bubbles or little gaps here and there. Same thing with the legs, and so that's what you're seeing here. Now, what I have to do next is I'm gonna scrape off the epoxy, sand it, and buff out the epoxy, and then I could flip it over, drill the holes, and put the tenons in. Okay. Okay, so I just finished buffing this epoxy out, and my goodness, it's crystal clear. So for those of you who have never seen me do this before, I'm dry sanding up to 400 grit and then wet sanding it up to 4,000 grit, and then I'm using a buffing compound to buff the epoxy out, and I get a really nice glass-like epoxy, and it's amazing. Now, I have 4 legs, but I only really need 3. And I have to drill the holes, angled holes, onto the seat. And I like to use this drilling jig from Rockler. And yeah, I think I'm gonna go at 17.5 degrees of an angle instead of my usual 15 degrees, because I kind of want it flare out a little more. And I already marked the center point, I guess. So let's do that. Woo! Okay, so here it is. A stool made out of broken skateboards and epoxy. Now, there are a few mistakes along the way, and let me just go over it real quick so you could avoid those mistakes. The biggest mistake I made was not sealing the wood, especially the broken skateboard edges, and that's where majority of the bubbles started happening. So the first half of the stool seat, I actually dipped the broken edges in epoxy, ensuring that I seal them. And then towards the end, the epoxy started getting a little hard. So I had to kind of rush, and I just laminated this broken skateboards, and I didn't seal the broken edges. And that's exactly what's going on here. So the first half here, there's a lot of bubbles, and then the other half, there's no bubbles. So that's the biggest mistake, I think, so far in this project. Now, the second biggest mistake I made was wasting a whole lot of epoxy. I mean, this is a lot of money. So if you were to do this, make sure to have the right size mold so you're not wasting any more epoxy than you should. So if you avoid those mistakes, you could have a crystal clear epoxy, just like this test one that I did for my Instagram. There's 0 bubbles on this stool, and somehow the second time I get to make all these mistakes, huh? So don't make the same mistake that I did and buy a brand new epoxy. Don't let it get old, and seal every wooden edges that you're going to do the deep pour. Also, one thing that I forgot to mention, it's up to 3 inches deep for casting, and then up to 2 inches deep for river tables and whatever else that you guys are making. So make sure to check out the link down in the description below to help me out and help TOTALBOAT out and help yourself out. Now, one thing that I am very proud of during this whole project is turning these tapered legs. Now, using my table saw lathe jig, it's just so much more consistent, as well as it's less messier because I have a dust collection hooked up, and it cuts a whole lot faster than a lathe. Now, another thing that's gonna be a little dangerous turning these legs on the lathe is epoxy is a lot heavier than wood. So what I did experience with the test stool is that it started wobbling because the middle part is heavier than the ends, and it started just pretty much going off just wild. So kind of dangerous. And I had a little bit of epoxy chip out as well. So there's none of that using my table saw lathe jig. So if you guys want a video again, because I actually posted it, if you want plans for it, let me know down in the description and I'll figure something out. Now, I made few stools in the past, like this one, I made a video about it. This one, I made a video about it. This one, I made an Instagram reel about it. So if you guys are interested in these stools, make sure to check out my website, which is woby.design. What else? And that's it for this video. If you haven't already, make sure to like this video, hit that subscribe button, and comment down below. What do you think about these stools? Thanks again, and until next time. Woo!